Good morning and hello everyone. Hope you're all staying safe and keeping well in the comforts of your home. My name is Prashant and have the honor to be your host and moderator for the second of the season's UNITAR Thought Leaders series that is offered to you in collaboration with Conferry Malaysia. Thank you, Badri and Team UNITAR for creating this absolutely amazing opportunity. The UNITAR Thought Leaders series was developed with the aim of inspiring, promoting, innovating, and delivering impactful insights from industry captains and leaders. It has in the past showcased several prominent leaders, and this season with Conferry on board as a collaboration partner, we intend to take it to the next level by probing several key issues that have surfaced because of the pandemic. The Thought Leaders series surfaces deep thoughts and discussions around several key domains, including organization excellence, business and HR finance strategies, human capital development, sustainable development goals, entrepreneurship, emerging technologies, just to name a few. A little bit of background of myself before I introduce the panel members. A change partner at heart and passionate about working with aspiring leaders like yourselves and leaders alike. I've been fortunate and have lived in 3 regions, worked across 14 countries, and have now been in Malaysia for 10 years. I'm very proud to be serving clients in our region. What I realized recently when I was looking at one of these professional resumes of mine, that next year I'm going to be KL is going to be the city I've lived in the longest in my entire life. So just a little bit of interesting trivia. Have spent majority of my career in the organization and people advisory space. And working with Conferry is an absolute privilege, one that enables me to work with super smart colleagues and experts like the panelists to add value to organization, boards, leadership teams, just to name a few. Finally, I wish to welcome all of you, including young aspiring leaders from UNITAR International University and guests who have taken the time this morning to join this very exciting session where we have brought together 3 prominent leaders who will be sharing deep insights and expert perspectives on today's topic. So ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the show to begin. Our first panel debated ethical leadership and its impact to us as leaders, employees, and citizens. Today, we take on another topic that has challenged us as professionals and organizations that is critical to how quickly and successfully we pull ourselves up to perform and transform. You guessed it, it's all about rethinking the future of performance management. We have an amazing panel debating this topic, and I would like to introduce the distinguished panelists so we can get the show on the road and you can get to know them a little bit better. Our first panelist is Nadia. Nadia comes with over 2 decades of human capital and HR experience with a focus on organization development and change management. Her experience spans across both local and Fortune 500 MNCs across industries. Her expertise actually lies in driving change initiatives, which, by the way, I can vouch for, focusing on developing the optimum organization structure, attracting the best talent, using creative and strategic channels. She has also been actively involved in creating positive and sustainable development platforms for enhanced talent capabilities and employee engagement for sustainability. But her passion has always been in the work around women and leadership and has played lead roles within diversity advocate initiatives with Talent Corp, is an advisor to Gorgeous Geeks and Cyberjaya Women Network, and is now the co-lead for HR workstream for the famous 30% Club in Malaysia that's doing an amazing job. She's also a strong believer in coaching and mentoring and is a certified coach and an NLP practitioner. She's also an elected member of the board of the Malaysian Employers Federation. And needless to say, her contributions have been highly accorded with recognition through a number of awards. Nadia is also an associate faculty at the Oya Graduate School of Business at UUM. Welcome, Nadia. Our second speaker is Shazmi. Shazmi is the Country HR Director for Shell Malaysia. He's responsible for Shell's overall HR in Malaysia, which has 4,500 employees across upstream, downstream, and SBO. With almost 2 decades of business and HR experience, he's a seasoned and experienced HR leader in Asia Pacific. But what's interesting is, before joining Shell, he was a cluster lead for Southeast Asia at Pfizer. Well, we all know that brand all too well. and I know what you're all thinking. I will check with Shazmi later if you can get us a few shots. I'm just kidding, Shazmi. Beyond work, he's an active speaker and leader of the Malaysian HR leaders community. He represented Malaysia, which I didn't know, Shazmi, at the Touch Rugby World Cup in 2019. Shazmi and his wife are blessed with 3 children. Saladin, who's a devoted fan of Thomas, Sumaya, who's an avid Peppa Pig fan, is that right? And the little one, who's Suhaila. Shazmi is a proud alumnus of UUM and is an adjunct fellow at the School of Business Management. He's also an adjunct professor at the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities at UTM. Needless to say, has also been awarded several international accolades and awards. So welcome, Shazmi. Our third leader, who's also a prominent speaker and an HR leader with over 2 decades of experience, with a strong demonstration of strategic, tactical, and operational human capital matters, holds an MBA in strategic management, and interesting bachelor's degree in sociology and anthropology from IIUM. She's also completed her executive education on strategic human capital at the National University of Singapore, as well as from INSEAD. Interestingly, Salwa has worked very closely with GLCs and MNCs in Malaysia, and while working with one of them, Khazanah, she was one of the team members in ensuring successful implementation of the GLC transformation program. She's also had a stint working closely with the Ministry of Education, coincidentally, in the development and implementation of Malaysia National Education Blueprint. The third one that I would like to mention is actually her time with the Malaysia Aviation Group, when she was part of the team at the initial stage in the execution of Malaysia Airlines restructuring and the turnaround plan. Presently, as the Group Human Capital Officer at SME Bank, Salwa is instrumental in bringing catalytic change to the bank via transformation initiatives like digitizing human capital, driving high performance, as well as strengthening the culture, just to name a few. She's also chairman of the HSC at the bank and is a strong proponent of workplace safety and well-being, physical, mental, and emotional. And we can all appreciate how critical that is in today's environment. So welcome, Salwa. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big virtual applause for the 3 distinguished panelists, and let's get the show on the road. So we're gonna move through the session through different stages, and I think we're gonna start with setting the foundation over the next little while. And I guess, Salwa, maybe I'll pick on you to be the first speaker to kick this off. It's really to understand performance management. Let's set the context as a panel, and let's break it up into 2 parts. Performance and management. Let's focus on performance. What does that even mean?
Hi, morning everyone. I'm Puan Salwa. Thank you, Prashan, for the first question. Defining performance, if you look at it from 2 perspectives, i.e. from organizational perspective, basically it's about measurement tool. How they measure productivity, at the end of the day, how it relates to the bottom line of the organization. That's very simple principle. However, nevertheless, we do not forget the fact that it has gone through evolution, even from the organizational point of view itself. And there are so many theory, so many methodology being used in measuring the performance. Nevertheless, I also would like to bring some discussion with regards to how then the performance be measured at individual level. Simply to say, basically it's about justifying our existence in the organization, proving that the organization, the role is actually still effective, still needed, and hence it needs to work collaboratively between the individuals and also the organization itself. That's very simplistic views of the performance. Back to you, Prashan.
Thank you very much. And just to build on that, when we start talking about performance, it kind of means different things to organizations at different points in the maturity curve. So maybe I can see Shazmi nodding his head. So I'm just going to look for signs like that and start picking on everyone. So Shazmi, I mean, with your experience, what's performance mean for you at Shell, and more importantly at Pfizer as well?
No,
I'm kidding.
No, there is a textbook definition of performance. The ability to deliver on your goal based on a set of timeline, etc. And your goals have to be aligned with the organization. I think that's a very textbook definition. I think for me, performance is what inspires someone to come to work and do the work that they do. And the inspiration that you have will actually determine whether you perform well or you don't perform well, right? Performance doesn't only mean you're doing excellent, right? It can be also poor performances. So for me, is the driving force behind that particular individual on why do they come to work? Why do they come to work with a smile? If you're working in retail, why do you genuinely appreciate the customers that you come? I think that is performance. And in order for an organization, whether it's big, whether it's a Shell, Pfizer, or a mom and pop shop, determine whether they can perform well or not. It's all between the inspiration and the culture in the organization. I think that's the two key driving force behind performance. And we always overlook that. We only look at goals and we think that's performance, but that's very textbook.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just one thing that I would like to say to all our attendees, I shouldn't be the only one selfishly asking all the questions. Please pop in your questions in the chat box. What I will promise to do is I'll try and get as many of the questions out as possible and ask the panelists so that you can get an answer to your questions as well. And remember, every question is a good one. You're probably doing someone else, helping someone else out who's probably thinking about it and hasn't asked. Maybe just on that topic, what performance means. And Nadia, I mean, I've been fortunate enough to have seen how you've helped your organization from the time you started and the journey of becoming and strengthening itself. How did you approach performance when you first came on board?
Thanks, Prashant. For a while I was panicking a bit. I don't know whether you noticed. I kind of lost connection just now, and I thought, oh my God, when you talked about performance, performance of internet and how it actually affects the motivation of the person, right? So I mean, I've heard what Salwa and also Shazmi mentioned just now. I think like I agree with Shazmi when Shazmi says, there is a textbook's definition of performance, but in reality, as you said, Prashant, when for HR practitioners like us, when it comes down to delivering or managing performance in an organization, I guess it varies from one organization to another. I mean, I've been privileged to have worked with very sort of like a very performance-driven kind of organization such as Microsoft, very American, right? And I've also worked for European companies like British American Tobacco and Nestle. So, BAT is more American, I would say, in a way. Nestle is kind of like European, sort of stable. And then, I've been lucky to work for sort of hybrid local companies like AirAsia and also SP Satir now. Now, I guess what you're referring to is probably SP Satir. When I came in, I mean, as you all know, SP Satir has always been known to be Best Employer Award, and that we have been working with Prashant in his previous organization. And it does take a lot for a company to achieve such award, because it means there's processes, there's culture, which is a big thing, and I do believe that culture plays an important part in driving the performance of the organization, which as you distill it down to individuals, there should be a certain culture of clarity. So in Satir, for example, we have a clear group KPI, a clear business unit KPI, and clear individual KPI. So everyone knows exactly what is to be delivered. That's just the process. And when we talked about the intent, everyone's clear about the intent of how do you want to deliver, because, twice a year we have the CEO's town hall. But I think the challenging part is how do you make it work in driving towards it, which I think we will discuss a lot more. But I'll just kind of like finish this a little bit as in a preliminary to what we'll probably discuss later on, is how do you debunk the whole idea of performance when there are challenges that comes in between. So for example, now we're going through the pandemic and we talk about VUCA and so on. So the flexibility and agility of organization in sort of shifting that direction is very key. So for example, in the last 1.5 years, as much as we have the group KPI, annual KPI, we're now starting to scrub by even quarterly and looking at the numbers through our management meetings on a monthly basis, but not just look at the numbers and say, hey, this is what we want to deliver, but really filtering layers by layers and said, how much can this change or shift to ensure that we still are on the same boat despite the storms that we're going through. Over to you,
Oh,
Prashant.
fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Excellent. And, so one thing's very clear, defining performance, after hearing from all three of you, defining what performance is absolutely critical. What about the communication part? How do you, is it equally important to communicate that well to the employees, or is it understood?
Can I just take that first, if you don't mind?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I do think, I mean, for me, I'm a big fan of communication. I think there's nothing like over communicating, because, when you're talking about an organization that's got 2,000 plus and Shazmi 4,000 plus, or maybe in some other organization, telecom or Tenaga 20, 40,000 plus, you can't take for granted that whatever that you discuss is then passed through to your middle management and so on and so on. And we all know this fails sometimes, absolutely a big failure, because if we depend on the passing of information through the chain of command, it somehow, by the time it gets to the last person, it gets diluted. So in a way, I feel the storytelling, communication as in storytelling, is very important, because it's not just about communicating what we want to deliver, but it's about communicating what is it that is meaningful, so that people who are in the or in Satya, we got team Satya, every team Satya understands their role, whether even if you're a tea lady, how do you do it at best? So in Satya, we have to be the best in what we do. So I remember when I first came in and said, oh, that's kind of a simple sort of a company mission, right? But after being in the company for a while, then I realized, well, simplification sometimes is important, because to be the best in what you do is basically, if you are a tea lady, you make the best tea. If you are a site supervisor, you do whatever. Of course, that is then framed up within the scope of your job. So that's storytelling, because when you have a meaningful story, everyone can internalize it rather than just say, oh, this is a KPI and I have to deliver. The second part of communicating, I think, is really wrapping it up, or making sure that the communication is apt for the segment of your workforce. Because obviously, when you're talking to a senior management level, your management team, it has to be a little bit more strategic. But when you go down to the lowest level, it has to be simplified. I remember when I was in Air Asia, when we talked to the RAM boys, the boys who actually send your bags into the aeroplane. I had to come down to their place, not asking them to come to a hall or to a room. I go down to their workplace and then speak in Bahasa, speak in a language that makes sense to them. I think that is so important, because then at the end of the day, you get everyone connecting what you're saying from one point to the other, and everyone playing their part in delivering what they think they should be delivering.
That's excellent, and that kind of brings me to my next question, and maybe Salwa, I'll pick on you for that one. Is the management part? So we've talked about performance. What's this management part of performance management?
The components of management under the entire ambits of performance management is about making sure the entire process is efficient and effective. Hence, we are managing it. Because at the end of the day, as I mentioned earlier on, depending on the maturity of the organization, the management styles of performance differs accordingly. And it's important for human capital personnel to really understand where does it stand with regards to his or her own organization in terms of maturity of the entire process. Therefore, it is important as well for human capital practitioner to realize that there are different tools, there are different techniques, there are different ways in terms of approaching and managing the entire process. I've been in organization whereby they could be at level 1 and certain organization at level 5. Therefore, the component that you measure, even the element that you take into consideration in assessing the wholesomeness of a performance differs. Some organization, for example, I can relate with everyone. In Khazanah, we measure we call it 3A, the aptitude, the altitude, and also the attitudes of individuals. Because of the entire organization, we believe at a point of time is already matured to be assessed on the 3A components. But I've also been in an organization whereby the entire process, the management still need to start from level 1, and it's just a basic KPI setting, basic communication, without any elements of leadership, for example, being put in place, it would only be taken into consideration perhaps 2-3 years down the road. Hence, the management is very much, the management of performance is very much a management role to assess in terms of readiness and also the feasibility across organization in the implementation. Yes, Pashan.
Thank you. Shazmi, I mean, many of us look at Shell as an organization that has done some amazing stuff when it comes to the people side of business, including me. And I'm curious to understand, when you talk about performance and you talk about management, what does it mean for someone who's worked in Shell or trained in Shell? How does it differentiate over there?
No, I think even Shell, over a period of time, have changed the way we do performance management. Yeah, and I think an organization has to evolve through time to change the way they do performance management as well. In the past, you have long laundry list of goals that you want to achieve. It's measured, standard half yearly, annually, etc. But now what we have done in the last couple of years, which I really like, and just to build on what Nadia mentioned just now, is simplify things. Yeah. So every Shell employee today, you have a 5+3, 5 business goals and 3 what we call foundational goals. So the business goals are all the big items that you want to achieve. In very layman terms, right? We don't want corporate speak. Yeah. And the 3 foundational goals for any Shell employee is almost standard, right? Safety, which is very important to us, whether you work in an office or you work at a site or you work offshore, safety is crucial. We talk about ethics and compliance. We talk about integrity. We talk about being compliant. And third, it depends on the role that you do. So every team leader in Shell, the third foundational goal is your team leadership. How well are you doing as a leader in bringing the team together, galvanizing the team, ensuring that you're building a community around your function or in the company? And those are the 3 big things that we measure as the foundational goals. And the 5 business goals can completely change. And we make it very simple so that people can understand. The one challenge that a lot of organizations face, even some that I've worked in the past, is when you have goals that are so corporate, big picture goals, right? As a person who's working 3 levels, 4 levels, on Shell we've got multiple levels because we are a huge global organization. People don't understand the work that they do. How did that contribute to the goal of the organization? And I think that's where the big missing piece. You have to always tell how the work that you do brings value to the organization and achieves the organization mission, right? Organization goal. So right now we have moved towards a net zero emission goal, right? Whether you're an upstream or downstream, we know by 2050, we want to be a completely net zero emission organization, a completely different shift from a typical oil and gas company. We're the first to move toward that direction. When we do our goals today, we always ask, the work that you do, how does that help in our net zero emission goal? So in HR, we say that one of the things that we're working on is a completely revamp of benefits. Malaysia is going to be the pioneer for it, where employees have a chance to basically apply or via a flex methodology, a benefit that can contribute to net zero emission, whether you want to buy solar panels, you want to buy food composting machine. Those are the kind of elements that we want to put in our benefit program that helps to drive the company mission. So we have to be very clear that, to Nadia's example, whether you're a person that works in the RAM or, whether you are the person that makes the tea, your work brings value to the organizational goal. If you cannot connect the dots, unfortunately, it will be a very, as what we say in Malaysia, a very short sendiri goal. Right? You feel that you're doing really so much, and sometimes you feel that, I'm so busy, but my performance rating is still so low because you're not bringing value to the organization. So let me just pause there, Prashant, and pass back over to you.
Well, thank you, Shazmi. We're starting to get some questions, so maybe I'll ask the first one, and I think it's a great question because it has a little bit of spice to it. So I'm going to pick on the 2 organizations. The 2 panelists who are working with Malaysian organizations to understand if that's really true or not. So this question's from Badri, and it's the first question, and he wants to understand, is it true that Malaysian organizations fail to recognize that the systems, performance management systems, are ineffective or too rigid for a dynamic or a high risk marketplace? Is that true?
So I'm excused from this question, right?
Yes. I promise you, Shazmi, all the tough ones are going to go to the ladies. Yeah.
Being the only rules among the two tons. Yeah.
Okay, maybe Prashan, I can take it. Well, I disagree because like I said again earlier on, it depends on the organization. I can only speak for Satya because I am in Satya and it's a local company going global, right? I must say we do have a very robust system because I work in many different organizations. We have a whole system of KPI, and it goes. If for many of us who've been in MNCs, you remember our scoring would be like, okay, 2 or 3 or 4. In Satya, you have 3.37 or decimal, and I get these questions a lot from the board members. Like, how does it work? Because first of all, we're a property and construction company, and my CEO is an engineer, and when it was designed, I heard he was also part of the committee that was working on it. So it's fully engineered, if I can use the word, right? Because it has a very clear cut percentages or weightages, grouped, and then you have the individuals that I mentioned just now. You have BU, and depending on your roles. For example, in my role, I have 80% of my performance based on my KPI, and then 10% my own department and 10% from group. And why a smaller percentage for group for me? Because there is only a certain thing that I can be directly involved in affecting delivery, right? And then of course it goes on different percentages for different roles and all that, and that's fairness and that's equity, I would say, because you can't get someone who's at the site supervisor being affected by a group KPI that he has no impact at all, right? I seem to see everybody be looking frozen. So I'm not sure whether you guys can hear me. Can someone say whether you can hear me?
Yeah,
we can hear you.
Yeah.
Somehow all of you are frozen on my screen. Okay.
Oh gosh, I hope my eyes are open.
So question is, are Malaysian companies failing to recognize performance as an ineffective? Like I said, I don't think so. But I think what we need to do is probably be more flexible. And I think the pandemic has shown that we need to have a flexibility, and that flexibility comes from the human being that is managing the performance. I think Salwa was talking about managing the performance, right? And I think we cannot say, okay, if we are to deliver this target, and of all these million things that's happening over the last 1.5 years, we're still sticking to that. I mean, it causes a lot of stress. I think we have to be realistic, and I think that's when your internal processes comes into being and saying, okay, because of this is happening, we're now looking at cost efficacy. We're looking at how do we manage our cash flow differently? How do we then look at our internal processes in terms of control? So for example, I think we were ahead of the curve because we started freezing hiring in 2018 when we had an integration with IMP. We say, okay, look, we now know we have an organization that is quite max up. So how do we make sure that we optimize the organization? So we started having hiring freeze, and we only hire for key positions or new position that is needed because of the new direction of the company. I think that has helped. Secondly, what we did was to also look at merging roles, and it does require a little bit of thinking, which means when something happens, as in like if somebody resigns or something that hits one business unit, we had to sit down and rethink, okay, how do I then repurpose a certain role or merge certain roles or even outsource certain roles? Because we know, for example, now with all the changes that's happening, many of the roles in IT should probably be looked at being outsourced because it's changing so fast. It doesn't make sense to have a permanent headcount and then you're hiring someone with a certain skill set. Then 2 years down the road, that skill set is irrelevant. So it requires a company or organization to be much smarter And it also can be very painful, because it means you have to really think out of the box and sometimes make some tough decisions. But what I'm glad to say is that so far, alhamdulillah, we have not cut any headcounts since the what do you call this, MCO 18 March. So far we've been holding on, and we've done everything that we can to make sure that we have everyone intact. But it does take a bit of sacrifice. So a certain level had a bit of a pay cut and so on. So Badri, for me, I think it's not completely all failures lah. And I have been in multinational, and I've also seen how some multinationals performance management may not be as robust as what we have.
Thank you. And by the way, we're getting questions. So I'm probably going to Salwa, we'll continue this conversation with you. And I guess the question is similar. It's like, especially, and Nadia's already touched upon the situation that we are in now with the pandemic, and this question has become ever so much more important. And it's many organizations use fancy, sophisticated, IT systems to enter data and manage the process, but we seem to be losing the human element. Is that happening? Do you see that happening?
I think to answer the question, first of all, one thing we have to remember: performance management is just a tool. At the end of the day, the effectiveness of the tool goes back to the person, goes back to the employee, goes back to the leaders, right? So I do believe there are so-called facts with regards to the question, because at the end of the day, as I said, it's the perceptions, right? If you perceive the entire process being negative because of your experience, we can't blame you. However, at the same time, if you perceive that the entire process has been very effective and positive because of your experience, then it's also an appreciation from your side. To answer Prashan's question, for me, I have a very intriguing conversation with my board member when we talk about enhancing and improving the performance management system for the bank. Then it goes back to this two fundamental questions. Are we doing it scientifically artistic, or is it artistically scientific? So it's a decision that the management and the board need to embrace and take into consideration in terms of mapping the entire process. And for the bank, because we are changing the entire landscape, hence it was a conscious decision to do it scientifically artistic, i.e. the first 2 years is all data driven. We are bank, numbers matters. But then along the process, there are elements of communication. There are also elements about engagement, giving clarity of the entire intent and objective. I think those are some things that we put through because of we understand the needs of organization. Nevertheless, at the end of the day, perceptions matters. If our employee, me as a human capital practitioner, if the entire organization perceive and give him feedback that the process is actually not effective, I need to also pause and perhaps take into consideration that the performance and feedback are important, because they are the recipient. And for human capital, our services, our output that we give to the organization must bring benefit. If it doesn't bring benefit and people does not appreciate it, I think we also need to take a pause and perhaps reassess the entire situation.
A great point. And I think you talked about leader, and I think, and by the way, thanks Pete for the question. And you talked about leader, and we've got an interesting question actually from Alex, which talks about we've always looked at performance management between the employee and the immediate superior, so the reporting manager. Should we actually change that around? Should we improve it by it being conducted directly with HR or with the top leadership, for example, in an organization? Shazmi, what do you think? I mean, is that something? Will that help?
I don't think so, right? Because I think if HR conducts performance management for everyone, then the understanding is that HR knows everyone's performance in and out. The reason why you have it with your line manager, or in some cases like we have in share line manager +1, 2 levels up, is because we feel that the best person to gauge or judge your performance or assess is the person that works directly with you, and not Salwa or Nadia or myself who probably not even seeing the person in action. We have to understand that a lot of our organizations are not only based in headquarters where we see the person on a daily basis. We are, geographically spread, for some of us across Malaysia, for some of us across the world. So it's almost impossible for HR to be able to do that assessment. But we always have that avenue where if someone is unhappy with the way the performance management has been conducted, or they feel that there is a bias action against them, then of course HR will definitely come into play. But HR will not do the performance management one by one. I think that's one, and I think that's being fair to the employee that we're not doing it. But yeah, for higher management, of course, we do a plus line manager +1. Right now, when we do performance calibration in Shell, it's only done at the VP or SVP level. It's no longer done even at a lower level. It's done at a much higher level. Yeah, there was if I may jump in a bit on the human element, I think one thing that we tend to forget is that performance management is not what you input in the system. Performance management is that conversation that you have with your line manager. For me, that is performance management, where your line manager tells you, Shazmi, this is where you're doing well, or most of the time, Shazmi, this is where you're not doing well, right? And that's the area that you want to hear so that you can improve, right? If it's a conversation that, oh, you're doing well in every single area, that's not a good performance management. A good performance conversation is when you are told, this is an area that I really need you to improve. If I may just pick one, a lot of us are hung up on performance rating. Excellent, higher, strong, etc. When I was in Pfizer, way before the Googles of the world, Pfizer introduced a no performance rating performance management system. So the only thing that you do at the end of the year is that conversation, this is where you've done well, this is where you've not done well, and this is where we expect you to become better. Very, very clear. Employees loved it, managers hated it in the beginning, because it's difficult to have those conversations, to tell someone that this is where I need you to improve. Because in the past, I'll just tell my staff, oh, you got a higher rating, or everyone happy and it's done. Or in the past, I tell you, you have a lower rating. Now, no matter how I try to justify, in the mind of the employee, my boss doesn't like me. But when you just go on conversations, it's a different ballgame altogether. So yeah, so don't be too hung up on what system you use, how complicated, how complex, how robust, how canggih it is a conversation that matters. Back to you, Prashant.
Thanks a lot, Shazmi. No, makes complete sense. I guess, as we talk about this and we talk about the conversations, the pandemic has only shown us that those conversations.
Prashant, can I just add in?
Of course, please. Absolutely.
Nadia, you froze after adding in.
So I'm sure we'll get Nadia back in a second. So while we wait for Nadia to.
Prashant, sorry.
Sure.
To answer, just to add on Alex's question. Hi,
Please.
Alex. I do receive same question actually from my employee. They are begging for HR to take over the entire performance management.
Oh, sorry. I had a time. I had a lag. I mean,
was
that this line is not going to.
Can we proceed? Okay. But then, based on my experience in that conversation, I realized the fundamental issue is actually because employees are not happy with the conversation. They believe that their superior are not capable to give that levels of clarity and also ability to connect in terms of their expectations and the organization. So at the end of the day, it's about the culture. It's not about the process. And I do agree with Shazmi on that.
Sorry, Nadia. We lost you for a second at that point. I think you wanted to add something. No worries. I think we've got a little bit of a connectivity issue, not unknown when we're having a performance conversation. So I'm sure we can send a note to the internet provider that Nadia is using. Yeah, absolutely, and I'm a bit worried making that comment because the providers in Malaysia are clients of mine. So my apologies in advance for that bad joke. Hi, Nadia, we got you back.
Hi.
I think you want to share something.
Yeah, I don't know. Can you hear me now? Oh my God, this is
Super.
bad. All right,
Yes,
so I was just
yes.
saying, Shazmi was, I mean, I think the question for Shazmi was, should HR handle the performance management? And I think Shazmi shared one angle, but just like to share another perspective. I mean, I do agree with Shazmi, but I think sometimes there could be scenarios where HR can come in and help, because when I look at performance management, one, it is a process that you want to go through to assess where the individual is. But I also see this as sometimes an OD, organizational development platform. There has been cases where the business unit head would probably sometimes need HR to come in just to be sort of like the third person in the conversation. And I share this because I've had done this before. There was, for example, let's say in a particular business unit, there is a certain issues with a, let's say, shared services, and that business head say, okay, Nadia, could you just come in and sit in the three people that I have, just to be the third person and also have a neutral conversation, because sometimes I think HR can do the influencing bit in terms of making a neutral assessment and also drive certain messages. So that can happen, but it should not be happening a lot of times, because if it's happening too many times, then there's absolutely something wrong with the process. um, Secondly, I thought it is also important to see that the role of HR is, other than facilitating the process, is also to kind of like be it takes courage, I would say, because sometimes as we calibrate the results, and, you can see like some of the BU heads are, in our case we call business head, or maybe opco in other cases, some are so lenient, right? I mean, you look at the results and you're like, you can't be like everyone's getting like super high I mean ratings, and we're still using ratings, right? So I think this is where HR has to play that devil advocate's role and sometimes be the bad guy to say, hey, hang on, I don't think this is in sync with whatever results that we're seeing. And for my HR folks who are in there, I think you all can relate to this. It is a tough job, because it means that you have to sometimes tell off someone who may even be very senior, to say, look, I think you have to redo this, or something that is absolutely wrong, because the whole performance management process is not just about data, it's also the human side of it, where I believe as HR, we need to also turun ke padang lah, basically understanding what's on the ground, so that you can then have a systemic thinking and know that, okay, this thing is happening in this place, this is happening in this place, and connect the dots, because otherwise you're just relying on whatever that is being submitted. So I truly believe HR has to go down to the ground, understand, scan the environment, be able to also understand everything else that's happening on the ground, so that we're not just collecting data as we calibrate the performance management.
Thank you, Nadia. And I think that also helps answer one of the questions we got from Sekar, who was talking about, how do we ensure everybody's using the same yardstick, and is there some level of calibration that happens? So, so I think we definitely...
You just rotan them. Just give them the big cake.
Sekar, rotan. There you go. Another really good question, and I think he's reading our mind, is from my friend Manish, who basically is, we talked about the quality of conversation and how important that is. And I think I've heard that from all three panelists from the very beginning, even when we started defining performance management, or rather performance at that point. Now that we also started to touch upon the whole pandemic situation. I think he's got an interesting question is, are there any new best practices that we should consider adopting? Has something changed for all of you? Maybe one thing from each one of you that may have changed because of the pandemic that you might adopt in the future?
May I begin?
Absolutely.
For SME Bank, yes, the pandemic has allowed us to revisit the entire process. We reinvent the entire process, because we now believe that the scheduled session, start year, mid-year, year-end, doesn't work as efficient and effective as before. What we are doing now is actually we have this outcome-based performance, whereby it's a system-based, all the respective heads, the superior would already been able to determine. So it's an ongoing process. It wasn't being scheduled, and everyone know because of the nature of work currently, very much, pretty much 80% work from home. The monitoring part is actually a challenge. Therefore, the process actually need to be enhanced in terms of giving clarity of the outcomes and also the objective that need to be achieved. That part actually, the pandemic has given us the opportunity to accelerate that rather than being a normal BAU process of performance management. That's actually for SME Bank. So we call it OBP Access, our current online system, whereby people are just putting in terms of their expected deliverable for the week, for the month. And if you achieve, we don't care in terms of how you fulfill your hours at home. That allows flexibility and also some clarity to our employee with regards to their deliverables. Yeah.
Sure. Maybe Nadia, if I can pick on you next. Has something changed for you? And also, what about timing? We look at performance as a year. Has that changed for you in your industry?
Okay, so I think just like Salwa, except that we haven't made it so formal, I think the pandemic has actually demonstrated or shown to us who can be more resilient than the other. So we, in Setia we have so many projects, right? And it's all led by different leaders and so on. And I always said this: it's only during crisis time that you see who are the true leaders and where are the real competency gaps, right? Because I'm always challenging my sales and marketing people, and I said, look, in good times you guys are not really selling because people are queuing up. It is this time that you're really selling because people are not queuing up, and you have to be creative. So the real good salesperson is now. Now is the time. From a HR perspective, I think now is the time to see who's the talent, who's the leader, and so on. But that says a lot about a company being flexible and being agile. And I like to touch on the word agility because everyone talks about building agile teams and so on. And can you imagine if I go out and say to my HR team, okay, let's now have HR, agile HR. It sometimes can be very intimidating because, when you use all this terminology, like, oh my God, huge change is coming through. Rather introducing it in the actions that we do. So, for example, we now have realized that the pandemic has shown that we need more collaboration. So, as before, we all have our own KPIs and so on, but I think a lot more collaborations are needed. And so we now also prioritize and say, hey, where are the parts of the organization that is bleeding? And therefore, we need to then create project teams. And the project teams are much more integrated from many different functions, because I think as a team, we need to make sure that the ship is going, we are going in the storm, through the storm, together as a team. It doesn't matter. Some parts of the business are doing really well, some are not, but let's see how can we then help that. So the project teams are basically the agile teams that we're building, and we are revisiting the discussions on KPI. And formally, as a company, we have annual assessment and also mid-year assessment. Mid-year assessment normally is around this time where we discuss more on development. But I think for us, informally, we're now doing it and scrubbing it on a quarterly basis, and really quickly get onto the action of creating project teams to work on it, and which we all have been communicating. At the end of it, some of the KPI will have to be changed, and I think people are just getting used to it. Like, yeah, we established the KPI just 6 months ago, but now it has to be changed, because if you don't change it, then it feels quite unfair to the team members, and so changing it and having that constant conversations, I think, is very key, because then you're making the company and the teams agile and moving all the time. I always have a challenge of, if we have to formalize everything that we do, then it gets a little bit rigid, especially when you're a big company, right? Then, it takes, by the time it gets formalized, it will probably take a few weeks already. So we're sort of like maneuvering the storm that we're going through it informally in some ways, but making sure that the key conversations are going on, not just within us, but also having a lot more discussions, a lot more conversation, a lot more meetings, even with our board members. I mean, obviously, those who are in public listed, we've got all kinds of committees, right? In the NRC, finance, events, investment committees, and all kinds. And we're now also looking at sustainability. Now, sustainability was never quite as strong. Well, I mean, it was part of our goal, but it never was like a big ticket item. But the last 1.5 years have said, look, we really need to look at this as a key goal. So building that up, halfway the year, how do you do that? Does it mean that we change our KPI? But then again, you're just saying that, yes, we know we need to do it, but how do we then informally and speaking to the right people, slowly moving that on to action?
Well, thank you. And I have to, just one point that you mentioned, Nadia, which I realized when you talk about agility, a lot of organizations now are measuring agility. And what I realized at Conferry, we've actually been measuring that for the last 20 years. So we've been measuring leader agility. So it's not only within Conferry for our leaders, but even for our clients. That was one of the assessments that we would always look at from a mental change, results, agility perspective. So that was something I realized when I first came on, that I would be measured on that as well. I've got one more question, and I think this is really moving into the next kind of section that we are in, and it's from a panelist from the previous panel, actually, Dr. Bob, and it's a really interesting one. He's asking a question around on the softer side of things. Usually, when we look at performance, right, everybody's zeroing in on revenue, a lot of financial factors. But what about the non-financial indicators, that we can use for human motivation or development ethics and such? Shazmi, maybe I'll pick on you. I know Shell's doing a lot in that space.
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing that happened during the pandemic, when March 2020, when it hit us in our part of the world, and after that Europe, the first thing that Shell agreed, and Malaysia was among the pioneers to do it, is to ask staff to relook back at your goals and recontract it with your managers that the goals will change now. You don't need to deliver exactly what you set out for in the beginning of the year. And that message was extremely clear. Then we guided people on, okay, what are the non-negotiables and what are the negotiables? Non-negotiables were safety, having integrity, compliance, ensuring your team is well taken care of. Those were the non-negotiables. Whether it's pandemic, you're working from home, we have to do that. Then, of course, the non-negotiable, the good to do for this year, the extra projects, we all said that one you can move aside. Yeah, I think that's important. That's one. On how do we measure the non-business goals? A lot of our goals, as I mentioned in the 5+3, are not financial goals. The level of your engagement with your staff counts. The mental well-being of your people in the team, that counts. Have you broken any ethics and compliance laws? Those things, safety, for example, those things carry even more weight than, for example, I brought 100 million ringgit sales, which is way above my target. So at the end of the day, the philosophy is we want to achieve our goals, we want to grow, etc., be profitable, but not to the extent that we leave a trail of dead bodies around us as we grow up in our career. That's not what we want to do. There are organizations that do that, but we've moved from that. Yeah, I think in the past it's all about business goal. We don't. It's not that we don't want to achieve our business goal. Don't get me wrong. We all want to achieve our business goal. It translate to rewards, etc. But at the end of the day, the non-business ones that are more crucial. Just give you an example. Our bonus is highly dependent. Not only on our cash flow, our share price, etc., but on our safety record. If there is a fatality that year, anywhere in the world, we know for a fact that our bonus is going to be bad, right? And I think those are the kind of things that, and now every executive and senior executive, so from my level above, and I'm not that high in the high global Shell world, if we cannot achieve our milestone on energy transition, we don't get our bonus. So it's about really putting what the objective of the organization is, where we want to go, and we translate that. I think that's really crucial. So beyond just how much money we make.
Oh, that's absolutely fantastic, and I love the one that you talked about, Shazmi, on if there's even one fatality, nobody gets the bonus. I mean, that just shows the value for life that the organization is putting forth, and I'm sure Salwa will appreciate that, being on the HSE committee, and maybe from that aspect, Salwa, is there something that you're focusing on, especially when you're trying to drive ethical leadership, and lots of boards today are demanding that of their leaders today, and we debated that in the last panel as well. What's your view? I mean, highly regulated industry.
Similar to Shazmi, basically for bank, we are highly regulated. Therefore, the entire corporate KPI, for example, even at the C level KPI, financial is actually perhaps only 40% or 30%. The rest are more on compliance, more on the so-called control function, how we address bank negara, CRR, for example. And also there are elements of people management. But what has changed, and I'm being very proud with that, actually for SME Bank, the calibration for the C, for example, for the bank, right, at the board level, it's not only presenting the data, it's not only presenting the rating, the calibration process at the board with regards to individual C-suite performance, we take into consideration their results on the employee engagement, for example. We take into consideration their 360 feedback assessment. We take into consideration feedback that we receive from our employee. Hence, the conversation is not only about performance, the other non-performance that play an impactful so-called component to the entire organization in making sure it's actually being run smoothly, also being deliberated at the board level. That part actually really play an important role for us assessing individual leadership capability, and we are translating it even at the L2 level, whereby the conversation is not only on the numbers, because based on our experience, people are very good in manipulating the numbers, but the real conversation, especially during the calibration, looking at the facts. Our employee engagement survey result, for example, the 360 degree, that's where the entire wholesome discussions of individual as a performer, as a talent, as a high potential should be taken into consideration. So that's what we are doing now for SME Bank. And as much as possible, we are replicating it to the lower level, and we always believe it starts with the leadership team.
Thank you, Salwa. The next question is a really interesting one, and it's from Tinku Intan, and it's for all panelists, but maybe I'll pick on Nadia first, because she does do a lot of creative stuff when it comes to on the people side of things as well. And it's basically a question on, we look at performance management. Many people look at it as a process. Some people look at it as a painful process. Some people like to hide under the desks if they are asked to have performance conversations. Is there any way that we can make it more fun? And the question is around gamification, to actually motivate people and gamify the process. Have you seen anything like that happening?
Oh, I'm not sure whether this part I can be creative, Prashant, but I agree with the question. I think we have to make sure that performance management conversation goes beyond being a serious conversation, because people get very jittery and very stressful when it comes to performance management conversation. And it also depends on the kind of manager that you have, because for me, I believe it has to be an inspiring mode. I mean, like what Shazmi was saying, what Faisal was doing, where are you now? What are you not doing well? And how can you do better? So I think whether the person is not doing well or the person is doing well, the mode of the conversation has to be inspiring, because the minute you go on a very punitive approach, then it can be very dampening, it can be very damaging. Being an NLP practitioner myself, I truly believe that you you have to, number one, understand the person that you're doing. So you talk about gamification just now. I mean, obviously gamification is probably much more interesting and exciting for the Gen Y, right? I just want to share probably one conversation we had in one, or he's not exactly Gen Y, he's Gen X, but someone at the lower level. For some reason, his performance was coming down, and we were not sure. But I've been following through. I have a public Instagram, and for me, Instagram accounts or Facebook is a channel where you get to know your people as well. And I know that this person has been quite active over the weekend and so on. And I know nothing really happening in somewhat. I mean, not just from Instagram. I mean, it could just be perception, right? But also from what I know around this person, nothing that's happening on the personal front. So then the next question is the person motivated at work, or is the person not liking to work with the immediate superior, or is the person feeling bored with the current role? So I actually had a conversation, because I don't have an issue with this person, but somehow the results are coming down in terms of the outcome of his work. But we had a conversation, and I said, and it was a very, very good conversation, and I said, look, let me try and understand what's really happening. And we spoke for a while, but we also touched many other angles. And recently we just had I'm not trying to make it so obvious, but we had another process which the results of it has been it's probably about 2-3 months after the conversation. The results have been really fantastic. You're talking about an audit result has gone from bad to really good. So that's one conversation they have. But I've also had very young people. I mean, I would say maybe 40% of my team, 40% or 50% of my team, they're all Gen Y. And for them, the meaning of performance assessment can be very different to the Gen X and baby boomers, right? With them, what I do is I get them into projects, and where they rotate to become leaders in those projects. And my philosophy has always been to work on people's strength, because I am big fan of Strength Finder, because I think when you work on people's strength, they gain more momentum, they gain more confidence, and then you work on whatever gap that this person needs to work on. So each of them gets to rotate and be a leader in the different projects, depending on their strength. And through the project, what we do is we have all kinds. Number one, we have a project debrief, and through the project debrief, we get feedback. And sometimes it's quite scary, because when your team is already trained to be outspoken, they can be quite outspoken. So if you're a leader of that project, then you do get sort of a feedback that can be quite painful to swallow sometimes, but it's a growing journey for that person. So I've done this for the last 3 years, I would say. I think the feedback I've got from this group of people is that they've been very encouraged, because number one, they get to try out to do other things. There's 70-30 principle that I have. They 70% they do their main job, and 30% they get into projects, and they get to also be given the opportunity to demonstrate their leadership. And these I'm talking about, they're just senior executive, and they could have senior managers in the project. But if they're the leader of that project, then they are, it doesn't matter if they have a senior manager in their project team, they're the one that I said, you are the leader, you are going to be the one driving this project. So they feel that they're being assessed in many fronts, and it's a much more open and transparent kind of assessment. And I think the result is, I think people are much more open to new challenges, because the more feedback they get, and I drive this message that feedback is a gift. The more feedback they get, the more they feel that they want to learn, and the more they want to do better. So I think that's probably, I would say, the different types of assessment or performance management channel that you can do, because performance management doesn't mean just through your annual process, but it can be in all kinds of formats. I don't know whether I answered the question.
No, absolutely. And I think if I were to understand, and if I were to, just summarize some of it, you can gamify, but you can gamify around it. It's not necessarily just the process. There's a number of things you can do around the whole process to make it fun, and I think that's the awesome part about.
Okay, maybe one I forgot to mention. Well, yesterday we started our teh tarik, our teh tarik session for the HR department, right? And so we say, okay, no, because we've been really busy working long hours, and some of us meet quite often because of the different functions, subdivisions, and all. But for some, we hardly meet. So I said, okay, let's do this every 2 weeks. We have a teh tarik session 5 to 6 on Fridays. And we're not going to do anything else but just meet up and have a topic. And I said, you guys tell us what we're going to do. So yesterday we started off, we said, okay, next week we're going to have ice cream and charades. And I said, okay. I mean, obviously being competitive myself, and I said, we're not just doing so just to create that whole fun of competition, and say, okay, we're going to have 2 teams. And I say each team will have a leader, and the leader cannot come from management team. So in the team that I am in, my driver happened to be in the same team. I said, okay, Azahar, you're going to be the leader. Okay, now you're going to decide. And so it created a whole burst of fun and activity. But in doing so, we're actually seeing everyone in action, right? So I can see for some they're excited, for some they're like, oh my god, am I going to be the next one? So, but this is life, that's going to be it. But I think as a team and as a leader, you will find that this is another way of looking at how best one individual can flourish. And again, I say, okay, assign, okay, this person, you're going to be in charge of this, and make sure that you then go and find your team. So that person will then say, okay, he will define who's going to be in the team to decide on the game and so on. But that is a simple example, but it is actually an application on how each individual can amplify their skill sets.
Fantastic. And that's another example.
Prashant, can I
sure,
just
absolutely, please.
To answer Tengku Intan. Hi Tengku Intan. For SME Bank, we have gamified our leadership development. And we are doing a lot in terms of making sure our rewards actually attractive. And to address, as mentioned by Shazmi earlier on, actually we have allowed our employee to claim their flexi benefit for solar energy, solar roof. So we have given that flexibility for our employee. But I really like your idea about gamification and performance management. If you do have any solution for that or any recommendation, I'm more than happy to get in touch with you, Tengku Intan, because I do believe when you pose the question, Tengku Intan, you may have something, and I would like to tap on it. I would like to understand it. Let's reach out. I would love to connect with you.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Salva.
Yeah, Prashant, just a couple of quick points on gamification. I think it'll be fantastic if you can do it, but the gamification is to create more clarity on the performance management, not to make it more confused with it. Oh, I have this tool there. So I think that the clarity, if gamification can add clarity to performance management, I'm all for it. I think one. Second is, do not introduce gamification unless your performance management is already well understood by the organization. Everyone knows exactly what it is, because the last thing if you want is to feel like I'm just adding more tools into a process that's already a bit more confusing. If your culture is strong, everyone knows how performance management works. Now, gamification creates a tool that makes it simple, makes it more fun. Then, yeah. If not, maybe get the basics right first.
Oh, wonderful point. I mean, getting the basics right before you can get to the next level, get your basics right. And that's so true. Sometimes we do tend to jump ahead and miss the foundational and the basics. So great point. Thank you, Salva. Thank you, Shazmi. And thank you, Nadia. This one question that I had, again, Salva, I'll probably pick on you and you'll know why. So usually when we start thinking about performance and we start thinking about performance management, if we close our eyes, we are seeing these big corporations, right, that all of you represent. I want to just change focus a little bit to SMEs. And it's so important because performance goes beyond just a process or a conversation for SMEs, because when they come to your bank, SME bank, they want a loan. They've got to demonstrate that performance. So it becomes so important for SMEs. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of people on the call today who are aspiring entrepreneurs and are going to set up SMEs getting ready to launch into larger organizations? What's your message for them?
Thanks, Prashan. My first message, okay? If you are SME and you are interested to find financing, come to SME Bank. We have a lot of facility to offer to you, and we are very committed in terms of the developments of our client. We handhold them, especially the ones actually newer in the industry. And because this is aligned with our mandate as a development bank, whenever we give any financing to our client, we are not just giving financing. We take care. We make sure that they do have the development part because via our academy, our SEDA, whereby we provide the relevant training in terms of management of the organisation to our client. At the same time, we have our bankers actually are responsible in terms of making sure that we monitor. We have this KPI, so-called KPI we assign to our client, whereby we measure upon giving them the financing, we measure their growth. We also measure employment. How many employment opportunity have they been able to create based on the financing that we give? We also measure in terms of their technology enhancement. So those are reportings that we have been consolidating and we have been working closely with our client. That need to be demonstrated in terms of making sure that they are benefiting from the financing and the entire nations are also benefiting from the financing. For a bigger SME that have been with us, then we have the fourth element that we are also monitoring, whereby in terms of their export capability, and also for those actually about to mature and ready to be so-called transition to commercial bank, we also measure in terms of any new growth that they put in place as an organization. So those are the roles and also the performance measure that the bank have been put in place to measure our client. We believe what we call it as graduating our client. So if you are tier 1 SME, we always push to make sure that you are able to move to tier 2 SME. So that performance measure that we put in place and be monitored by our bankers, our relationship managers, allow us to assess on ongoing basis and also via structure process. And we have been very proud if our client, so-called our partners being able to so-called being graduated to the commercial bank. So we are not holding them back because we need to allow room for the new SME actually to get the financing and also to be developed and being groomed by the bank. Yeah.
Thank you, Salva. And remember, everyone, SME Bank. Don't think otherwise. Give Salva a call.
We are nice people. Remember, kita nak tolong. Kita bukan along.
Maybe I'll pose the question to you, Shazmi, and then Nadia as well, because as part of your organization, you work with multiple SMEs at different points in the process. Upstream, downstream. Within construction, there's so many different partners. When you drive by an organization, you assume it's just that organization, but there's so many different touch points. What are your messages, Shazmi? For example, when you work with so many SMEs, you will hold them to an equal standard. What can they do to impress large corporations like yourself?
Well, I don't think it's about impressing. I think it's about delivering what they set out for. I mean, whenever we work with an SME or in any organization, we've got contract deliverables, etc. Now, for as long as they deliver, to that, I think that's one. And when we, and I know I'm going to sound like a broken record because that's how important it is to us. We are also liable for our contractor safety performance. Yeah. So in Shell, so I give an example, right? During COVID, yeah, most organizations that I know, maybe Setia and SME are different. They track the number of staff that get infected, the number of staff that are PUI, etc. In Shell, from day one, we also track the number of third-party contractors, and these are contracting companies, right? People that work with, for example, Sapura Kencana, all the other organizations that together work with Shell. We also track how are they doing in terms of their, COVID, whether their staff is infected, PUI, etc. Because for us, their performance is equal to ours. So whenever we bring an SME in, we will definitely not only tell them this is the standard, but we'll also handhold them to see this is how we get the standard together. If we look at our Shell retail stations, a number of the products that are sold at the Shell station today are not just the big company products. You have the mom and pop shop, the aunties, auntie selling keropok, etc. So we've given everyone this opportunity, but we still hold them to the good, to the high food safety standard that we coach and guide them to reach. We want to be successful, but we don't want to be successful alone. We want to bring everyone together on that journey. And in all honesty, Prashant, from our experiences and from the conversation I've had with the business guys, is the SMEs that are very much driven to reach the standard more than the bigger companies. The bigger companies feel, you can't mold us anymore. This is our tried and tested method. But the SMEs, they're very hungry to learn and they're very hungry to deliver.
That's a wonderful message, because you're right. We just assume that the bigger companies will get it right, not realizing there's so many things the SMEs are doing. Nadia, what about you? I mean, there's so much connectivity to SMEs, even when it comes to property and construction, from that industry.
Yeah, so we're just like Shazmi. I mean, obviously, although we have about 2,000 plus employees, but the real ecosystem is more than that, right? Obviously, we've got contractors, subcontractors, and so on, the whole supply chain. Yes, I agree with Shazmi. I think it's important to maintain the standards. There's only so much we can influence, but I think being the principal, we need to ensure that we influence them in a way that it comes to our standard, and more so if it's really the minimum requirement of the law. So the pandemic has actually shown to us that there are, the divide between the have and has not has widened. So if you talked about the property and construction industry, the subcontractors, there's some of them are small, mid-size, and it really has hit them very badly. And so the foreign workers are under their paycheck. If we have this MCO, EMCO, whatever you call it, work are being delayed and it cannot be done. But they still have to maintain their workers, and they still have to maintain the CLQs, which is the central labor quarters. And again, there is also regulations. I'm going to make sure that very detailed regulations, even the thickness of mattress. I think all of you have seen that in the news and so on. So these can be very much more costly than before pandemic. And it's compounding the issues that they're having. So one of those things that we do as someone that's supposed to be bigger is, for example, we decided to have a food aid campaign. And so we then helped our contractors by providing food aid to their workers, because we want to make sure that they are able to at least maintain that standard of making sure that the workers or employees have a decent well-being standard, which is within the UN standard, whatever UN SDGs and goals that we have. I think that's important, where we're not just saying, just because you're contracting with us for work, you have to deliver this. But when we know that they're not able to do this, how do we come in and intervene and at least support them? Because we're all in it together, right? Because if they are part of our chain and they're bleeding and we don't help them, it will affect the whole outcome that we're expecting to. So I see this as a more of a holistic process where we need to ensure that we're not just expecting something, but coming in to ensure that this is done at the right standard and making sure that everybody is being taken care of as we can.
Wonderful. So we are actually coming up to a little over 10 minutes, the last 10 minutes of the panel. And I wanted to do one real acceleration before we start winding down. And it's a question from Dato Wasir, who was our panelist for ethical leadership. And needless to say, he's still thinking ethical leadership. And so it's a tough one. And he basically says that, CEO compensation has become obscene. There's been a lot of talk in the press at times, and there's a lot more scrutiny around that space. And as an outcome of performance management, there is a connection to the rewards program. And CEO compensation also, there's a large component which is variable, which is performance linked. And essentially, the divide is getting wider and wider. What's your view as a panel on CEO comp that could be linked to performance management. And again, as part of the bro code, I'll not post it to Shazmi first, but since I promised them, and I'll open it up to
That's
ladies.
not
But
fair, Prashan. You should post it to him. He's the bigger organization.
all right, I'm
Prashant,
sorry, Shazmi.
I can answer this first because of
Go for it.
my CEO doesn't earn that much. We are a development bank, of course. We are just at P50 and on the market, and we have been consistently monitoring it. Even for our CEOs, actually, there was a conversation with regards to his compensation against the other commercial bank, and we have been working closely with MOF actually on this, and we accept the fact that we are DFI, so we are DFI. Our pay structure is actually DFI. However, from human capital point of view, what we are doing now is actually to make sure that the non-financial incentive and rewards actually also being attractive as well, not only for the CEO and also for the entire organization. That part is actually something within our realm of control. But then again, I pass it back to Shazmi and Nadia because my CEO doesn't earn that much.
No.
So I will go next. We leave the last word for
We'll leave
Nadia.
it to Nadia.
So I think as you grow higher in the organization, the ratio between your fixed and variable salary differs a lot, right? As you grow higher in the organization, a lot of your compensation is dependent on the variable part, and mainly the variable part is actually tied up to performances, right? So there will be a good year where your CEO or the C-suite will earn a lot of money if the company does really, really well. But there's also a time that they won't earn as much if the company doesn't do well. While as you go slightly lower, the fixed becomes more than the variable. So there is always that discussion. But for me, and I'm speaking this more as a Malaysian, I know this has come out a lot in Malaysian media, on Twitter, etc., when they look at local CEO salaries. For me, the challenge is not necessarily about bringing the salaries of the CEOs lower. Is how can we work together as an industry to bring the levels of the salaries of the people in the bottom and the middle higher and close that gap. Whenever we talk about closing gap, we always talk about asking the CEO to reduce the salary, but never about the people at the entry level getting a higher salary. I think as a country, we want to grow to a high income country. It's not about bringing the CEO's salary lower. It's about bringing the entry level and the middle level. It's bringing about their salaries higher. And I think that's when we'll achieve, this high income nation. We should not only look at CEO earn 5 juta ringgit after a year, or suruh dia reduce lah. But why can't we all talk about increasing the salaries of those who are earning lesser? Nadia, you have the last words.
You've answered everything. So, well, I agree with Shazmi. I think for the longest time we've always had this very hot debate on CEO salaries, and we've never really talked about bringing up the first level, right? I remember when I don't want to mention how many years, when was the last time when it was the year I started my career, then you will tell my age, but 20 years ago, a fresh graduate salary and compared to now, there's not much difference, and I do think that we're not doing our talent a favor, and we are facing a talent drain because we're too focused on things that is of a certain targeted group, but we're not looking at it as a bigger picture for the good of the nation. So that's number one. Number two, I think, yes, in some cases, maybe the salary of the CEO seems to be very high, but we must remember, right? These are the companies where CEOs are taking huge amount of accountabilities, and they do have their fair share of stress. They have to take the first bullets, and they're talking about dealing with billions of dollars. You're not talking about millions of dollars, billions of dollars, right? So imagine if you are in their position, it does come with a lot of responsibilities and accountability. But on the other hand, I do agree that there must be a narrow down of the differences between the CEO and probably the next level and so on. In some cases, it may have been that way because the company could have started with an entrepreneurial base where the owner was, the CEO was the owner. So therefore, obviously it goes up very high. But there is probably a need to institutionalize some of it. And it takes time because you can't just suddenly say, okay, we're going to reduce it by 40%. I think that's not being fair. I think it has to be taken from a bigger picture and looked at not just from a basic salary, but looking at it from a total reward perspective as well. Because if you compare to the other countries, it's very similar, and already we are seeing, you don't have to go far, even by job families, people are already saying that I don't think that the Malaysians are paid very well if you compare to the other countries, so we need to be fair, because if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, right? But whilst we want to work on narrowing the gap, I think the bigger picture is we need to look at how do we ensure that we get the best talent and we pay them right. Because otherwise you continue to have this discussion over and over again, and like what Shazmi says, we're looking at the top but we're not actually bringing up the one at the bottom. So that the big question is, how do we bring that closer and expand our middle income, so that we can then have, in the organization, say flatter organization, can we have a much more flatter society in a way? I don't know, that's probably a wishful thinking, but we need to aspire to get there, because then only we can talk about equity, we can talk about, and of course that comes with skills, upskilling comes with a lot of other things, and so it's almost like boiling the whole ocean. But I think, needless to say, my last conclusion for this is we need to look at it in a holistic manner and not just look at that one particular. And sometimes it may be an overdose of just trying to look at that one particular. I think we need to understand the components that comes in there, and also the responsibility and the risk for that individual in taking up the job too. So it's not an easy matter to just say, yeah, we should reduce the CEO salaries. I mean, obviously we do have some very insanely paid CEOs, but we shall not go into that.
Thank you, Nadia. And I think, we're down to the last 4 minutes. So I'm going to do what I normally do for myself is, I always ask myself, when I go for a session, what's the one thing I can do? I personally, what would your message to the listeners be? What is one thing that if you had to give them advice, one thing that they can potentially take away from everything that you've shared? Nadia, maybe you can continue, and then we can go to Salwa and then to Shazmi.
Okay, I'm a big fan of reflection, right? I think the key word here is reflect. I think we discussed a lot of things from different angles, from different kind of organizations, different contexts, and so on. I think what I think we all should take away is reflect on our own situation and really think through before we jump into a conclusion. So I think personal reflection is very important. Hearing all the information that we have. And then from there you decide on where you want to move on, whether it's your own personal performance, whether you are happy or not happy. But the powerful word is reflection.
Wonderful. Salwa, thoughts?
I think my conclusion, and it has again leveraging from the reflections, right? As a leaders, even any one of us who have our employee beneath us, actually, in fundamentals, actually, we are the reflections of our team. If we think and we always say that our team members are not good, basically directly it's also reflections of our quality leadership, the quality of our leadership. Therefore, I always remind my leaders, the moment we open our mouth and we say that I have a bad team members, then we should also look at ourselves. So those are some takeaway that I would like everyone actually to bear their mind whenever we talk about performance management.
Shazmi?
Yeah, I think a reflection for me and a reflection for everyone who dial in is asking yourself, if you're working today, do I know what I need to do to become a high performer? If you don't know that answer, and then go and ask your line manager that answer. If he or she cannot give you an answer, then you have a flawed performance management system. Then you really don't know what you're doing, right? And you really don't know which direction you want to go. But if you know exactly, if I want to aim for that, whatever, 2-month, 3-month bonus, and these are the things that I need to do, then I think you have a good performance management system. Remember, the system is just a tool. It's that conversation and understanding and knowing the value that you bring to the organization. So I will end on that.
Thank you, Shazmi. And, honestly, really appreciate you spending the time this morning to share your thoughts. It's an absolutely critical conversation to have. And, I also want to thank the attendees for sending in their questions. I think I can selfishly ask all the questions, but it becomes ever so much more meaningful when all of you as attendees send in your questions. So, definitely give yourself a pat on the back for that. And again, performance management, the whole performance aspect has become so critical. Timelines have shrunk. The concept of performance is getting a bit blurred. But at the end of the day, it's about that conversation. It's about spending that time. It's about having the right intent. And as we are as organizations today are working towards what performing and transforming. It's not a one-off. You have to continue that process as you adapt and change ever so often. It's become absolutely critical. And I hope everybody has enjoyed this session. And that kind of brings us to the end of the session. My request is, you'll get a link for the session. Feel free to listen to it again. There are a lot of things that you can take away from it. It was a real honor to spend the last hour and a half moderating the panel with you, Salva, Nadia, Shazmi, and I have to thank Badri and Team UNITAR for organizing another amazing session with a great group of panelists. And with that, we come to the end of the second of many more to come UNITAR Thought Leaders series. Thank you, everybody, and stay safe.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.